How's it going, everyone? Behavior recently announced some massive base game changes coming to DBD. Some are quality of life changes and others are directly balance related. DBD has never really seen any type of Operation Health before, so this is big news and has everyone very excited. However, I can't help but feel like the DBD community might be getting slightly breadcrumbed here. If the person you keep locked up in your basement hasn't eaten for 4 days and you bring them a half-eaten apple, it's going to seem like the greatest gift of all time, right? So let's take a more critical look at these changes because there are definitely some red flags for concern here and we need to be aware of them so that we can properly test them on the upcoming PTB. Speaking of which, when the PTB drops, hit me up. I'm gonna need some players to test all this stuff out with. Alright, without any further ado, let's dive into the changes one by one, starting with the anti-slugging/surrender option. Okay, so Behavior is rolling out a surrender option for survivors when they've all been slugged, and the killer can also end the game if all the survivors DC, and I get it, they're trying to fix this annoying griefing tactic where killers slug all the survivors and just let them bleed out for like 4 minutes, right? Some killers do this because they're just toxic, and others do it to avoid the 11.5% chance that one of the survivors will pull themselves off of the hook and reset the entire game. So for the killers who are genuinely griefing, especially in a situation where you've got like 2 survivors left and 4 gens are still up, I think this is a great fix for that specifically. It works. But here's where I get a little concerned. It says that all players will keep their blood points when a surrender happens. But what about the blood points the killer is losing out on? Usually when I slug all the survivors, I go around and hook them, which gives me a ton of extra blood points. But now, if the survivors just surrender, do I lose all of those potential blood points? If that's the case, this could create a serious issue where the survivors can just end the game when they feel like it, just to kind of spite the killer. And here's another thing to think about. How sensitive is this system going to be? Like, could survivors immediately surrender if the killer is going for the 4K? How long do survivors need to be slugged before the surrender option pops up? If they don't fine-tune this system, it could easily become a way for survivors to grief the killer, not just in 4K slug situations, but just in normal game endings too. And honestly, it would just make more sense to bring back the endgame Mori, in my opinion, where if all the survivors are slugged or hooked at the same time, the game just cuts to a Mori and the killer gets the win. And on that note, if this surrender option triggers the endgame Mori, then I'm definitely on board with it, but we'll have to see how this plays out during the PTB. This is probably the one I'm most interested to test out. Next up is gamma adjustments, which will be really nice for some people that have darker screens, especially console players that are disadvantaged by all the nerds on PC using reshade. Obviously, gamma is nowhere near as impactful as reshade, but it's for the best. If something is allowed to exist in the game like reshade, a crosshair, or even some lame movement tech, it should be available to everyone regardless of their hardware, and if you disagree with that, you are in fact a loser. Okay, next up we have Go Next Prevention, which is Behavior's attempt to stop survivors from giving up in any capacity. That means they are not allowed to give up on the first hook or the second hook. Behavior confirm that. So for those of you out there that have below 50 FPS setups, enjoy the permaban because this system will not only give you a DC penalty, but also derank you an entire grade. Now, to say the least, this system that Behavior is trying to create here is incredibly ambitious, to the point where I have to ask the question if AI is somehow involved in this, because it seems impossible to make an effective system this way. It's almost like trying to understand the intention of player behavior, which just doesn't work at all. If you even played 2v8 a little bit, you will see that some of the players will just be banned outright for being so bad at the game. The flip side is that if this is some algorithm Behavior has created to see repetitive patterns over multiple matches where a player gets flagged for going next over and over again, then I can almost guarantee that players will just learn how to game the system and min-max the amount of times they're allowed to go next in like a 24-hour period, similar to how like DC penalties work right now with the 40 seconds and then the 5 minutes. Players know that they can DC like twice in a 24-hour period without really ever facing any serious consequences. So I can definitely see something like that happening. So basically, I just don't see any way that this system is going to work. It's either going to punish people unfairly and make them uninstall the game, or it's going to be too lenient and just easily gameable. Like, honestly, can anyone explain why behavior is twisting themselves into a pretzel here to prevent the go next mentality when simply removing the ability to self unhook without a perk is like 90% of the issue? I really feel like this is way too ambitious, but I will say that I do hope I'm wrong. If this works out somehow, behavior will literally deserve all the credit in the world. On a positive note though, they came to the same conclusion I did in my Go Next Epidemic video about how players who play well should be rewarded with bonuses. DBD loves punishing players for bad behavior without rewarding them for good behavior, so I think a system that rewards you for playing well is the huge W takeaway here and might unironically do way more for the Go Next Epidemic than the entire punishment side of what they're implementing here. Alright, moving on to extreme hiding and body blocking prevention. Extreme hiding refers to survivors drawing out an unwinnable match by ignoring their objective and waiting out the clock. To combat this, we're changing the way AFK crows operate so they can more accurately identify when a player is deliberately avoiding engagement with their gameplay objective. Once a player receives crows, their location will immediately be revealed to the killer. We'll also be incorporating a feature that allows players to lose collision after receiving a third AFK crow, which should prevent instances of body block related griefing. This one is all good and honestly way overdue. A very obviously simple change requested for years upon years, finally being implemented, but I guess better late than never, right? Okay, now we have map offerings. They are reducing the effectiveness of a map offering being basically 100% down to a hard cap 20%, meaning that a 4-man survive with friends cannot game the system by all equipping the same map offering. So it's good that behavior thought about that. However, what we don't know is how this works with multiple map offerings, right? So for example, can a 4-man Swift put on 4 different unfavorable map offerings for a 80% chance to still send the killer to an unfavorable map? If so, that's a bit lame for sure, especially because they now hide map offerings in the load-in screen to prevent players from alt F4ing and dodging the lobby if they see garbage map offerings. So the jury is still out on this one to a degree, but I think we can all agree that map offerings suck in modern DBD, and I'm glad they are getting axed in one way or another. Moving on, we have a change to spawn logic. Survivor spawn placements can have a significant impact on a trial's outcome, an observation that has been repeatedly recognized by our community. It's become clear that survivors spawning separately and thereby covering more ground allows them to gain a notable advantage in completing their objective. We're changing the default survivor spawn roles to ensure that each survivor will spawn within 12 meters of one another on the same floor if applicable. To accommodate for this change, shroud offerings will be adjusted accordingly, and hopefully that means something good and not bad. Now, in my opinion, this change is deceptively massive. It might be the biggest one here. It's an enormous buff to killer, but one that is absolutely necessary. I've said for a long time on this channel that survivor spawns can literally rig a match against you. It's very obvious when you're using Lethal Pursuer and spawn in on a map like Ormond and see that the survivors have spawned in 4 separate corners, and it's like no matter what you do in that situation as a killer, you're almost always going to lose 2 or even 3 gens in your first chase. It's just brutally unfair. That said, this is such a serious major change to the game that I will genuinely be surprised if behavior doesn't revert it entirely or adjust it in some way to make it more favorable for survivors. Definitely not holding my breath on this one, but I do hope it goes through because losing purely because of RNG is always lame regardless of which side you play. Alrighty, moving on to improved AFK bot detection. I'm not 100% sure what they mean by this, but I'm assuming they mean the hacker Terminator bots that blow up lobbies in like 20 seconds, and they just don't want to basically mention it because they don't like to talk about cheating very often, but that's what I'm assuming this is. If so, that's a positive change for sure, so we can just move right on. Bulk blood point spending. This is a huge win, especially for content creators or people people farming to P100. It would be nice if there was like maybe some way we could set the priority in our bulk BP spending so that it grabs the specific nodes we want for like maybe like items or add-ons or things like that, but that's a bit of a nitpick. Either way, this is a very welcome quality of life change. And lastly, we have perk loadout and preview. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, this is not the ability to see the builds of your teammates in the pre-game lobby. This simply shows you your own build without needing to click on your loadout. It's mainly a feature for brand new players who don't even realize there's perks in the game. A lot of people obviously will be disappointed by that, but the truth is that allowing players to see the builds of their teammates will not work out well, and Behavior has acknowledged this as well. A good example is TCM had this feature and it led to a severe amount of lobby dodging, which in turn ruins matchmaking quality completely. Now, if Behavior ever wants to go that route, the only way to really do it is in a ranked mode where you cannot back out of the lobby. Even if they put this in, like, let's say the loading screen, as some people have suggested, players will just Alt F4 if they don't like their teammates' builds. Competitive online communities really just are that jaded this day and age, and you kind of just need to like accept that in the design phase of things so that you don't get yourself into an annoying situation when you implement these changes. Moving on, Behavior has officially announced the quest system. A funny thing is that the data I requested from Behavior a little bit ago with my MMR and everything actually had details about this in it that sounded pretty interesting, but I promised to keep those details a secret. But from what I saw, this is going to be a pretty cool addition to the game. Alrighty, now that is everything coming in phase 1 of this Operation Health. Phase 2 will be addressed in the anniversary stream specifically. Not gonna lie, phase 2 has some very concerning elements in it. I kind of have an idea of what a lot of these probably entail, but there are other ones like the MMR update, which has me very interested. Like, will they finally be moving away from kills and escapes? If so, that would be a very big win in my opinion, if done correctly, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. With all that said though, I am curious what you all think about phase 1. Are you gonna test out the PTB? If so, make sure to come and hop in my stream so we can test out some things together. And as always, thanks so much for watching and have a good one.